Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to share about my VBACs. If you're new here, my name is Kayla. I have 5 kids. I homeschool them and I'm a doula. And I just created this channel to share with other moms my experiences or what's helped me along my journey or just my whole life. Anyways, today I want to talk about my VBAC. So if you don't know what that is, it is vaginal birth after C-section. So when I was 22, I had my first daughter, and I ended up having an emergency C-section with her. I use that term loosely because after doing research after she was born, I realized that maybe that could have been prevented, but I didn't know at the time. And so anyways, I ended up with a C-section. I was very shocked and confused after giving birth to her. I struggled with postpartum depression pretty bad, silently, nobody knew. And postpartum anxiety, which that's a whole nother thing that people are now talking about, but back then, 11 years ago, that wasn't really talked about. So, and a lot of it had to do with my birth experience because I felt like a failure. I felt like I had done something really wrong, and I wanted a big family. And I had always heard that once you have a C-section, you always have to have a C-section. And then on top of that, there's I heard that there was a 3 C-section max. And so immediately at 22 years old, wanting a big family, I felt like my dreams were just crushed, that I was going to have a C-section every time I gave birth, and that I would only be able to have 3 children unless I had twins. And that was devastating to me. My recovery after having her was not great. I've heard of worse stories, so I don't really, feel like it was the worst ever, but it wasn't great. And I think a lot of it was because I was unprepared. I had no idea what to expect. And it is a major surgery. Um, so after having her, I decided I used all the fuel of like my anger and my sadness, which I did have to heal from. A lot of people think that you can just get over your birth experience and move on with your life. And I guess you can if you want to stuff it down and, glaze over it. But I do think as women, it's really important for us to just walk through our birth experience and heal from the parts that weren't okay. From, maybe a nurse that was unkind, or your doctor that did something you didn't want them to do, or maybe even a family member that pushed their way into your space and later you just felt like you kind of got taken advantage of in a very vulnerable time. Anyways, that's a whole nother side note. So after I was done healing and, walking through that, which it took me years to kind of heal from that experience, but I just used all the fuel, like I said, to jump into researching birth and pregnancy and postpartum and all of it. Ina May Gaskin, she is a midwife that in the birthing world, she's like so huge. But I started reading all of her books, and I just realized, whoa, like this is there's a whole new world out here of women talking about birth, talking about labor, talking about it in a way that's so different than our society or maybe even our mothers talk about it. And so I started doing all this research, watching documentaries. I watched a documentary called The Business of Being Born. And in that documentary, actually, my husband was a firefighter at the time, and I so would go visit him, and depending on what station he was working at and who the captain was, like I was able to go over and like hang out for longer periods of time. And we actually watched part of this documentary at the fire station. It's just random. I just remembered that. But I had heard that it was a really good documentary. It's only like an hour long. And so we were in the middle of the documentary, and I just started crying because it was talking about how most, emergency C-sections happen close to midnight or close to 5 p.m. because like the doctor or the midwife wants to go ahead and I say midwife loosely because the person I used for my first was technically a midwife. She called herself a midwife, but now that I've actually worked with midwives, she was absolutely not the kind of midwife that I thought I was getting. And so how they will want to go to, go home at those times or whatever. Those are just like when C-sections peak. Or, they'll use this reasoning. Because one of the main things with my daughter's C-section, it was an emergency C-section. But when she came in to tell me I was going to have a C-section, she was so calm. There was no emergency happening. She was really calm and just basically told me, you can't do this. So we're going to go ahead for the C-section and prep you. But it's not like people were like, in my mind, in a true emergency, there would be some kind of like rush to it, but that's not what was happening. So, anyways, I just began to cry watching the documentary because I felt like, wow, like my story is lining up exactly how this documentary is laying it out. That this is how women end up with C-sections. And so that was just huge. I was so determined to not have another C-section. I got pregnant with my son, my second born. When my daughter was 10 months old. And so I was not quite past a year. I was not a year away from my C-section, my surgery. I mean, my scar was still very visible. Like I had, and that's another thing. They do not recommend getting pregnant or having a birth. Yeah, I think they want you to wait like 2 years before getting pregnant. Well, I waited 10 months. But I was so determined, and I just began to believe in myself so much. It was not an option for me to not, I just got that strong willed in my head. It was not an option that I was going to have another C-section. I was just so determined. So I began to watch everything I could. I could read everything I could get my hands on. I would write out birth affirmations of just the truth about my body, that I was made for this, that my body is capable. Because I mean, after having a C-section, it was devastating to me because I felt like my body had failed me. I felt like I was a mom and a woman, but this thing that I was created to do just wasn't working. And it's not the truth. The truth is that I anyways, I could go into like all these truths about my body and things like that, but nonetheless, I wrote out these affirmations and I started saying them out loud. I would get into the bath every single night, and an Epsom salt bath, and I would read these out loud to myself, and I just began to believe in myself more than I ever had in my life. So in one way, like I wouldn't even say in one way, I am really thankful I had my C-section, which is so cool because when it first happened, like I said, it sent me into a depression, and it was one of the hardest things I had to overcome in the beginning of motherhood. But now I'm so grateful because through having that experience, I just started taking back the power of like learning and knowledge and research and diving in, going to La Leche League groups that I went to a La Leche League group, which if you guys don't know what that is, I know it's so old, and it was more popular probably in the 70s or 80s, but I found one, and it was so cool because I wanted to breastfeed, but nobody in my family had breastfed, so it was cool to have the support, and I just began to learn so much even from those women because a lot of them had had natural births, and just to hear their stories. And I don't know why I even went on that tangent of support. I don't know, just talk to women. We're all trying our best. We're all like, if you are having babies, talk to other women that have had babies. And I know there's this joke of like, you don't want to hear somebody's birth story and stuff like that, which I do agree. I don't think you should tell somebody your negative story when they're pregnant, and especially if they're not asking, and especially if they're about to give birth. But it's up to you as the young mom or the pregnant person or whatever. If you don't know, reach out, talk to people, ask questions. Anyways, I was doing all of that. I had heard about the Bradley method, which is a husband coaching way of delivery. I wish. And so through that, we went through Bradley method classes where she would come over and teach us, and just starting investing. I know that sometimes we're like, we're paying so much hospital bills, we don't want to invest, but truly investing in a doula, investing in childbirth education is so worth it. It's so worth it. You are going to remember the day that you deliver your baby for the rest of your life. And so we spend money on the craziest things, but for some reason we won't spend the money on the support that we need for birth. But either way, so we took these Bradley method classes. she walked through positions and how Noah could help me with labor. And then at the end of the class, I just connected with her so much. She was such a kind person and really good at listening. And I asked her to come along and to be at the birth of my son. And having her in that space was super helpful. But the number one thing that it was helpful for was for my husband, actually, because she had already obviously taught us in this Bradley method that he would be like right there in my like right hand person, like holding, but she kind of was support for him as far as like stepping in if he needed to go to the restroom or making sure he had a snack or getting him some water or something like that. So it was almost like she was there to support him because he was the full support for me. So that was cool during that birth. But even my second birth, so I ended up having the VBAC. So yay, I had the VBAC. It was amazing. But even with that birth, I had some not so great things. So like I said, just sharing my experiences on here. And a lot of the reason that I have the passion that I do is from my own hurts and things that have happened in my own birth experiences. So through my second one, I had the VBAC, so happy, felt so empowered. But even in that birth, I had the doctor, he was pretty mad at me because when I went in, I told you I was so determined that I was not going to have a C-section. So the nurses came in and they wanted to give me an IV. And I was like, no, thank you. Because in my mind, hooking me up to an IV was just one step closer to if they made the call of giving me a C-section. Because if you're going unmedicated, the IV really is for emergency situations, which I totally understand that they have protocol and things like that. But in my mind, I was just so against anything that was like going to make it easier for them to call a C-section. So I had refused the IV. So when the doctor came in, he was really upset with me. He actually began to yell at me, and I was unmedicated and I was in transition, fully like nude, just moaning, getting through transition. He's yelling at me, and me and my husband really didn't know what to do with that. My husband's ignoring him, or like maybe, I don't know what he was doing, honestly. I was just in birthing world. Well, I just remember him being like very aggressive and told me to lay back, that he was going to check me. And I just did, because, when you're vulnerable and in a birthing situation, it's just really hard for you to have the mind to like argue with somebody when you're literally experiencing this situation that you're having to, when you're going unmedicated, you have to just completely go into yourself, and so you're not even aware of what's happening in the outside world. So he checked me. I do remember hearing him say, she's a 9, but we're going to go ahead. Red flag. And then he ended up using 2 sets of forceps on me that while I was unmedicated, I did not have an epidural. And later, so I was super empowered by having a VBAC, but I had a 3rd-degree tear after having my second. And later, when I actually went through my courses for my doula certification, I had to really sit there with those feelings and those thoughts of that birth, because that doctor, even though I was so empowered by my VBAC, I still felt like he completely took advantage of me. And did not ask for my consent. And so there was no episiotomy. He, I tore, and anyways, that was just a whole experience. So then I got pregnant again within the year. I got pregnant when my son was 9 months old with my 3rd born, and I began to research other places to give birth. My son walked up, but it's actually the son that I'm about to talk about, my 3rd born. And so I started doing research on where to give birth and an actual midwife, and I went to Athens. I live in Georgia, so Athens, Georgia. I'm going to call these people out right now because they had just changed my whole experience with labor in a hospital setting. So I went to Piedmont Athens. That's what they are now, but they used to be Athens Regional. And the midwives there were amazing, and they were just so kind. In fact, the first time I went in, they listened to my birth stories, which you hardly get that, where like you go in and they are willing to sit down and listen. Anyways, so with my third born, I stayed at home and labored as long as possible, but then I went in and I had a VBAC, and it was the most empowering VBAC. He was actually my biggest child. He weighed 9 pounds, 9 ounces, and had him completely unmedicated and actually did not tear at all. At all. And it was just such a healing, redemptive birth. So, third time's the charm, I guess. Anyways, then I had my 2 little girls after him at the same place, at the same hospital, using the same midwives. And same thing, I did not tear. Pretty big babies. I've had all big babies. And I've had just beautiful birth stories with them. So I'll go into a detail and do a full, video on each of their births, but I just want to just encourage any mom that has had a C-section, has been told the lie that they will always have to have C-sections. That is literally my husband. It's snowing in Georgia for the second time, and he's riding them around on a gator with a snow tube hooked behind it. This is real life. I could have the aesthetically pleasing home to share but no, we're in the car because it's quiet. But anyways, so I just want to encourage any mom that is, wanting to have a VBAC, or just is curious, wanting new information. Just do your research, get your support, find a doula, find somebody that is willing to be there for you and to help you educate yourself, learn how to advocate for yourself. That's huge. Learn what questions, have your husband or your partner learn what questions to ask in the hospital setting, or at the doctor visits. Do the research on what your hospital C-section rate is, not just the doctor you're using, but the hospital, because if you go in, that just will show you a lot about the nurse situation, and it just shows you a lot. So doing the research on how many C-sections your doctor, like, what is their rate? Is it 20%? Is it 40%? These are really high numbers if you think about it, for a C-section, which are only supposed to be used for emergencies, unless you are choosing to have a C-section. Which, here's my thing with women and birth. Overall, as long as women are making the choice for their own body and their own birth, but I do not like when women are going in thinking they're getting care in a way to have a peaceful, birth, and then getting taken advantage of in vulnerable situations. So anyways, learn how to advocate for yourself, get the support, and you got this. You can do it. It can happen. And my daughter, my first, that was the emergency C-section, she was my second smallest baby. So she weighed 8 pounds 11 ounces, and then my next weighed 9 pounds 6 ounces. My third born weighed 9 pounds 9 ounces. My fourth weighed 9 pounds 3 ounces. And then my fifth, she was a little big thing. She was 8 pounds 5 ounces, I think, or 3 ounces. I say little bitty, that's still big to some people. But anyway, so just be encouraged. You don't have to succumb to what people are telling you. So anyways, bye. Thank you so much for coming. Subscribe, like, comment other videos that you would want to see. I really do want to share just whatever will help other moms and women. So thank you for watching.